Can I welcome you to the big procurement debate? My name is David Hames. I'm chairman of Science Warehouse, and I'm delighted to be joined on the stage today by Tony Stanyard on my right-hand side here, who's head of procurement at Nottingham University Hospitals Trust, NHS Trust, and by Jonathan Betts, a colleague from Science Warehouse. Tony is a fellow of SIPS. He's had a number of senior procurement roles in various sectors, starting with the retail industry and then latterly with the NHS. Jonathan started a career in the life science sector and then moved into software and spent the last 15 years working in cloud-based eProcurement technology. I'm going to start off just by giving you a few of the results from a survey that we run every year with eWorld, so it's a procurement trend survey. We can't spend too long on that because clearly we've only got 30 minutes in total. So I'll start by going through some results on that survey. We'll then move to about a 5-minute each debate by the two colleagues on my right, and then we'll open up the discussion to the floor. So that's the overall trend that we're going to follow. Before we start, can I just ask for a show of hands, where do you work? Do you work in, those that work in the public sector procurement, could you put your hands up? Thank you. And then in the private sector? You're predominant. So there we go, you've got a good split. Just have a few slides to give you some background. The first slide gives you some feedback in terms of some of the challenges. This is the first challenge we saw in the survey, which is the battle for talent. What we saw in last year's survey was a surge in the intention to invest in procurement, and that surge has continued this year. It's up by a further 22%, but at the same time, as you can see from the bottom of the slide, 40% of CPOs say that the lack of resources is their biggest challenge in 2015. So, as usual, it's a growing trend, as usual, the problem is finding good people and enough of them. So that's perhaps not a surprise, but you can see that that trend is continuing year on year. The next slide looks across the sectors, and we asked each sector to highlight the sectors they felt were most under pressure in terms of procurement. And the sector that's facing the most procurement concerns is healthcare, with a 53% increase in respondents citing that sector as the one facing the largest challenges in procurement. And we're lucky today, as I said before, to have Tony here, who will, I'm sure, tell us more about the challenges in the healthcare sector. You'll notice also on the left-hand side, concerns in construction are up, and on the right-hand side, manufacturing has decreased slightly and transport decreased slightly. So they're very happy, well, at least comparatively. The next slide looks at procurement performance. Now, in the years that we've been conducting the survey, we've seen performance in procurement increasing year by year. And in fact, in the last 3 years, there's been a threefold increase in procurement staff reporting departments achieving over 80% spend under management. So that's excellent. But at the same time, if you look at the bottom of that slide, what we're also seeing is that there's obviously a problem in hitting strategic procurement. Less than a third of those respondents pointed out they felt they were achieving strategic procurement. So it's clearly an issue in terms of tying into the strategy of the organisation that they work in. Now there's much more feedback from this particular survey, and you'll be given a copy of the slide set when you leave, but if you want to know more details, then do drop by the Science Warehouse stand, give us your name, and we'll make sure you get those details coming forward. What we need to do today, what we've chosen to do today, is to focus on one of the other issues that's arisen in the survey, and that is driven by the economy. The current economic recovery is split very much according to sector. Some sectors are experiencing growth, and obviously the challenges that brings. Other sectors are still very much in the depths of austerity with budget cuts. And those two very different scenarios raise quite different challenges strategically for the CPOs. So we're going to debate that today. It's the issue about strategic procurement in those two extremes. Clearly there's also a halfway house, but those two extremes of austerity versus growth. So we'll start, I'm going to move now to asking Tony and Jonathan to discuss that split. And we'll start with Tony. Tony, we heard that 53% of the respondents cited healthcare as an area undergoing major concerns on procurement, given the austerity situation. Could you maybe enlarge on that for us?
Yes, certainly. I could probably quote statistics for the whole half hour that we've got, so I certainly won't do that. But the NHS, as an overall organisation, £122 billion worth of spend. potentially a £65 billion black hole by 2030, and we've got to do something about that whilst maintaining service and delivering patient outcomes, and it's a very difficult challenge. We have 1.4 million employees, fifth largest company in the world as an overall NHS. If anybody wants to collect the stats, the biggest one is the US Department of Defense with 3.2 million people, followed by the People's Red Army of China with 2.3 million, followed by McDonald's with 1.9 million, Walmart with 1.7 million, and the NHS with 1.4. So that's most of the statistics out of the way, I suppose. I can only speak then on behalf of Nottingham University Hospitals, where I've been head of procurement for only 6 months. And we are probably the fifth largest trust in the country. We have a turnover of £880 million, and of that 300 and something million as non-pay spend. And I look after probably about 140 million of that. And the challenge is for us to reduce our deficit. More and more trusts are falling into deficit. I think there were 10% of all trusts in deficit last year, 26%, sorry, in 12-13, 26% in 13-14, and so far this year at the end of the second quarter, the figure is probably over 50% of all trusts are in deficit. So, what do we do about it? I can only do a certain bit within what I do. And what I wanted to just talk about, mainly get my message across today, is the only way that we can change things, and I can't be responsible for all of the deficit in Nottingham University Hospital. There are a lot of efficiencies to be made in clinical activity, but the buying of the stuff I can do better, I suppose. And the way that I'm looking at doing that is not through technology, which is a dangerous thing to say at this conference, but it's about engagement more, and it's about having people with the right qualifications within procurement to deal with the clinicians who are actually using the products on our patients. And that's what I'm all about, and what I'll talk about all day, if you let me, is I need clinicians within procurement in order to engage with the clinicians that are using the product. But austerity is with us for I don't know how long. If people saw the Channel 4 programme on the television last night about the NHS called £2 billion a week and counting, we had issues there. I can't say how accurate the programme was, but they were saying that there's a new drug out which costs £340,000 per year per patient to administer. Now, that sounds quite frightening. It's even more frightening when they then went on to announce that the company that produces that drug only produces that one drug and made £400 million profit last year. I can't take that as being the truth or valid. That's what Channel 4 said on the programme. But those sort of issues we have, addressing austerity by buying better, reducing supplier margins, and delivering benefit that reflects increased and improved patient outcomes.
Thank you very much. So I think we'll move to Jonathan. How about procurement challenges in an organisation that's growing?
Thank you, David. So yeah, I want to look at the flip side of that, and I'm actually glad you mentioned McDonald's, because the formative stage of my career was actually spent flipping burgers there. So that's where I started out. But looking at the challenges of growth, which I suspect are more to do in this discussion with the private sector, and really what the role of procurement is in that. And I believe very strongly that procurement has a really key role to play in that, not just in supporting growth, but actually in driving growth, so it can actually deliver to the top line. So, what are the ways in which this can happen, and what evidence is there out there? Well, there's quite a bit actually. So, obviously, we've moved in the last 5 years from the recession, from where organisations are being quite conservative and focusing on cost containment, which you might say as well, that's the natural landscape for procurement. But as I say, there's also very much a role for procurement in the growth side of the equation and contributing to the top line. But for that to happen, there obviously needs to be a gear shift and an alignment with the strategy of the organisation. And that's something we picked up in the survey, is that alignment isn't always there. So although we've seen again in the survey over several years, there's a desire for procurement to be much more represented at the top table and all that goes with that, but also to work in a much more strategic way, but that's not really feeding through. So we saw on the slide before, the bread and butter's being done well, but the moving to that strategic level has yet to happen, in my view. But even in the growth mode, I think there's also two MOs, if you like. So the first one is traditional procurement. So that's kind of carry on managing the risk, ensuring the supply chain is intact, and responding to demand. So clearly that is absolutely fundamental. But the other part, which I think is the growth part, has been called beyond procurement. So what else can procurement do to deliver on the top line? And there's increasing evidence actually that since the recession, the 5 years since then, that the sort of brute force procurement, if you like, going out and aggregating spend, rationalising your suppliers, all those good things, they offer diminishing returns over time. So you can only squeeze the pips so hard before suppliers really start pushing back and they become much less partners, and they start adding costs in or reducing their service levels. So I think that's a challenge that needs to be faced. So in terms of driving that growth and what drives that success, Tony talked about engagement. That's something where I very much agree, and I'm sure everyone here would agree. There are various activities that can be undertaken, but the first part is engagement. Firstly, to, as I say, align with the strategy of the organisation, to align with the CFO and the CEO in terms of what they're doing, what the strategy of the organisation is, and feeding in procurement's ideas and plans into that. So there will then be a natural acceptance of that. In terms of the activities themselves, I think there's a number. I mean, we haven't got time today really to go into a lot of detail, and I'd be very interested in hearing the kinds of activities and ideas that people have in the audience when we open up the discussion. But things like total cost-based management, innovation, sourcing, extended SRM, providing business services to the organisation. All of these are kind of value adds that procurement is very well positioned to deliver against. And actually, procurement is ideally positioned to provide that link between the supply base and internal stakeholders within the organisation, and actually catalyse a dialogue and bring in ideas, innovation from suppliers, and get them working alongside your own production teams or whatever it may be within the organisation, and also to leverage the supply base. So suppliers have a lot of assets themselves, market knowledge, expertise, intellectual property, resources, which within our organisations we might be constrained, but we can use our suppliers to actually drive that. So I think all of those are part of the beyond procurement element. And I use that terminology. It's something people are interested in this that's been put forward by Samuel Rashid and colleagues in the Beyond group. So I'm sure if you look them up on Google, there's a whole load of posts, of a dozen different kind of ideas that they have about this beyond procurement concept. And in terms of the evidence, again, we haven't really got time today to go into detail, but there's a number of studies showing how procurement is driving to the top line. So a recent one I've seen is the IBM study, Journey to Value, and they've shown that what they've classed as the procurement role models, the outperformers, actually do positively contribute to the growth of the organisations. And just to summarise, the three elements that are key to that are the three elements that are key to enterprise success are actually, firstly, that engagement piece, anticipating what the stakeholders may require. Embracing technology, so there's an excellent opportunity with technology to take away the day-to-day grind, if you like, and liberate resource to focus on other areas. And also embracing analytics, that's a big and growing area, something we saw again coming out of the survey, where combining that with analytics outside of procurement is actually is a great opportunity to drive growth.
Thank you. We're going to open it up. Can I just note the fact we've got several people standing around the room with microphones, so to make sure you're heard, I should probably point you out if we can. Can I invite both comments and questions from the audience? So the first thing I should say, by the way, is that it's clear we've been quite simplistic. If you think about it, we've got someone from the public sector talking about austerity, someone from the private sector talking about growth. It isn't that simplistic. I'm conscious that many people are here from the private sector, so feel free to cut across that simplistic view if you wish.
Could I just make a comment back
of course.
To Jonathan before we take questions? Sorry. Just 2 points on what Jonathan said. One, we are the NHS and we are different to the private sector. We can't change the output. And what I mean by that, McDonald's, I suppose, could always put 5% less coffee in the cups or 5% more cereal in the beef burger or whatever. We have patient outcomes that we have to deliver at a certain level, so there can be no compromise there, and that's a problem for us. And the other thing is, when you talk about technology, I haven't got any money to buy technology, so what I would like to do is to put my peg in the ground now, and if, whether it's Science Warehouse or any of the other people here, if you've got something that is going to deliver benefit to me, put your money where your mouth is and let me have it for nothing and take the benefit from the savings that are generated. And that's something I'll be very interested in looking at within the NHS.
We'll obviously talk later. Sorry, there's a question over here. Thank you.
Hi, this is a very live debate for me. I'm a private sector procurement manager. My wife's an NHS nurse. So this is a regular debate for us at tea time. The big frustration, I think, for my wife is that she works in an interventional radiology department, and the consultants within that team are very particular. They see their own reps, they've got their favourite stents or whatever piece of equipment that they like. They're very bullish, generally, in terms of personality. And I talk about my experience at work and the next big deal that I've done and talk about engagement and all the rest of it. And my wife will say, I'd love a procurement manager. Why haven't we got a procurement manager? And it's just, how do you possibly manage it at a micro level like that when you're talking about individual personalities who are basically ultimately going to have a say in what they buy, where they buy it from, with no real concern on how much it's going to cost, apparently?
Sure. Great question, and I can actually answer that because we've addressed that within Nottingham University Hospital, and that was one of my key messages, I suppose, is that we need clinicians within procurement in order to be able to deal with and discuss and converse at the right level with clinicians that have traditionally done that, without a doubt. I have appointed within my team a clinical matron, fully clinically trained. I'd rather have a clinician who I can train to do procurement. It's far easier to do that than to have a procurement person and try and turn him into a clinician. That will never happen. So we have a clinical matron and 2 clinical nurse specialists, and they focus totally on exactly the sort of thing, whether it's in orthopedics, whether it's in interventional radiology, endoscopy. They go out and talk to the people. That's half of it. The issue then is dealing with the suppliers, of course, because they have very well-trained, clinically trained reps. I use the term derogatorily, I suppose. I always call them reps. But they are well-qualified, and they know who to talk to, and they'll talk to the people that have always used their product. That's the other side of the issue that we have. So whilst my clinical team are out engaging with the clinicians, I, on a more commercial level, are getting not those reps, but the area sales director or whatever it is, in to talk about what's going to happen in the future, what the reality of the way we're going to deal with it. And it's early days, it's a long path to follow, but I take on board exactly the frustrations that you have, because that's where we started, and the way I've looked at it is to have clinicians within procurement.
Another question or comment?
Good morning, Andrew. I work for Journalist Partnership as an e-sourcing manager. I would like that's a question towards Tony, elaborate on the structure of your sort of procurement organization. Where I'm coming from is of course, engagement is number one thing, but there's two types of engagement as well. So you have your senior management, CPO level, and senior stakeholders, and then you have sort of BAU, day-to-day, engaging your stakeholders. And more private sector organizations, they're going to having smaller teams in category procurement and more sort of agnostic resource that do a lot, and just a general pool of resource, whatever you might be doing on a daily basis.
Well, the way we operate at the moment within Nottingham, obviously there's myself as head of procurement, who has almost board level representation. We have a deputy head of procurement. You don't see that very often in the NHS. So there's another senior person who can engage at general manager level across all the various directorates. Then we have senior category managers, and I have two, but I need another one. One will be in charge of clinical and one in non-clinical. It's as simple as that, really. We need somebody else to look at supply chain as we go forward with the procurement strategy from the Department of Health, but that is early days on that one, yeah. And then we will have category managers, not as many as I'd like, but two category managers in clinical, two in non-clinical, and then buyers below that. We don't integrate and interface as much as I would like yet, and I take on board what you say. That's exactly what we need to do. We should be represented on the directorate monthly management meetings, so we can see what their forward thinking is, and we're not at that yet.
Thanks.
Could I ask you just to say your name, perhaps, and affiliation beforehand? Would be useful.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Danielle Burns. I work for Computershare, and that's in the private sector. I've just got a question about resource. You brought it up at the beginning. What are your tips? How do we reduce staff attrition levels? How do we keep good people? I suppose, all the while we're sort of scraping at the barrel to make savings, we're then spending a fortune on resourcing our teams, and every time they leave every 2 years to find a better job, we're then spending that money again. So how do we overcome that?
I can respond. I mean, it seems to be a common theme today. I've had at least 2 conversations this morning about this resource challenge, and Tony as a practitioner has probably got a better answer, but I think it's something really which is very much out there, clearly is a massive challenge. So when financial services organisations are coming into the market and other with fairly big money, making the recruitment market very tight. I think the latest Edbury Daily survey is saying just that, for example. I think if you talk to any recruiter, then getting talent, as it's called, is very, very hard. And it's, I think whether it's procurement or any department in an organisation, there is always this challenge around doing the bread and butter, as we say, doing the day-to-day, doing that well. You can never take your eye off that ball, but there's somehow finding the resource and the wherewithal to go out and get the investment to get the people to take it to the next level. I'm not sure there is an easy answer, but other than, again, doing your business plan, taking it to the board, getting it approved, and then delivering against that. But it's the fundamentals have to be there first as well.
Yeah, I mean, for me, there are 2 elements to it, I suppose. The team that you have, okay, there's a budget for that, and they're going to deliver a certain amount of benefit. We need to ensure that they have the right support, the right training, and we put all of our people through SIPs, right from initially a Band 3 buyer, so we want them to be well qualified. But more forward-thinking trusts are also looking at what is the benefit of a new project, and scoping that out, and then recruiting possibly either an interim or a fixed term activity from somebody to actually, if there's a project there that's going to deliver £500,000, I would put the paper together that said to the Director of Finance, it'll deliver £500,000, I need 50,000 of it please, to fund the person who's going to deliver the saving. So that sort of speculate to accumulate again comes in there. It puts pressure on me because I then need to deliver, but that's the way we look at it. So we can grow the team and take a percentage of the benefit to fund the person who's going to deliver the project.
Can I just add one last thing? I think, as chairman of the company chief, what I find one of the key issues, it's not just about salary. It's actually empowering people. People need to feel that actually they can make an impact, make a difference. And it's this thing we highlight here about having strategic importance too. It's owning the issue and feeling that you can be backed and supported against it. It's an obvious point to make. But I think all too often it comes down to salary. It isn't just about salary. Good people want to get in there and make a difference, and you have to support them to do that. Another question. At the back?
My background is oil industry, and in oil companies, they have centralized the procurement function something about 40 years ago. Even they have different operating companies. To be honest, it was a surprise for me that in NHS, why we don't have the central procurement office. Having the talents, procedures, technology on a scattered way is nearly impossible.
That is the elephant in the room with regard to the NHS, no doubt about it. The only thing about the NHS which is wrong is that the word N should stand for national, but it isn't, obviously. Even in my sector of trusts, there would be 256 trusts, either foundation trusts or NHS trusts, which constitutes 166 acutes, 53 mental health trusts, 20 of another trust, I can't even remember what it is, and 10 ambulance trusts. And they each would have their own procurement department doing their own thing. And that's what we have, but we have to work with that. It's a government decision that they gave trusts foundation trust status, which are independent companies. They can do what they want. We are trying, heads of procurement are trying to collaborate more. We have some regional hubs carrying out collaborative work for a number of trusts in an area. We also have just contact between heads of procurement to look at aggregation of volume so that we can collaborate and standardise. But then we go back to the key issue, is the clinicians in Trust A will want to utilise that product and are geared up to use it, and people in Trust B will use that other product. So standardisation is very difficult. We recognise that, but we are doing whatever we can to aggregate volume and deliver benefit that way.
I think there's a new poster that take political hands off from our NHS. That is some posters I've seen from say MBS, some other organization. I think when they created the trust, it was a political decision. It was a good political decision, but not considering the consequence. And like any other decision, you should look at what has happened. Definitely in this part, you don't have very different procurement needs for procurement system in different trusts. You may use very similar equipment, very similar drugs or medicines, and very similar customers. So I think that is something should be corrected.
Yeah, I agree, and I say that there are pockets of where that's been done. If we look down in the southwest of England, from Plymouth down to Cornwall and up through to Bristol, one of my colleagues there has got all of the trusts together, procurement-wise, to commit to going out to market for, say, for example, examination gloves, which is something that's always talked about within the NHS. And he has delivered fantastic savings by getting all of those trusts together to standardise on one glove, with that contract given to one supplier for a 12-month period, and then they'll do the same again. So you don't give a long-term contract, so you still actually stimulate competition within the market. But it can happen, and it does happen, but at the moment I would suggest it's driven through forward-thinking heads of procurement rather than through the government.
Unfortunately, I'm looking at the clock behind you. We've actually run out of time. It's gone that fast. So Hopefully it's stimulated some debate internally. Can I thank you for attending? Can I also ask you to thank Jonathan and Tony in the usual way?
Thank you.